For the last 10 plus years, several hundred companies of all sizes, backgrounds, and experience have been working to develop the various components that will make up what will become an infrastructure for autonomous vehicles. Although the legislative framework has been lagging at the federal level, it's not stopped these companies from the development activities. As a result, a number of states have stepped into the void, providing a place to test and develop hardware, software, and firmware in facilities and limited real-world testing that serves to move the technology forward. First fruits of this heavy lift is poised to benefit the over-the-road trucking industry, which is in the throes of a variety of challenges, from a shortage of drivers to a shortage of equipment, all in an environment of record opportunities. Truck companies are turning down business they can't haul because they don't have the drivers and they can't get the equipment. Welcome to the perfect storm for an autonomous future for trucking. And I'm going to start with this. Did you know, Chase, for example, that one company actually last year operated over-the-road big rig without a driver across highway, and I'm going to assume an interstate, and I believe it was 80 miles. I want to get this exactly right. Now, bear in mind that Federal Express, United Parcel Service, and the U.S. Postal Service have been moving loads autonomously now for a while. Now, in a narrow range, predominantly in the southwestern part of the country, roughly from Dallas to Phoenix. So it's pretty straightforward. Here it is. And this was the trucking company TuSimple. Just before the new year, late last year, it completed an 80-mile freight route with no humans on board. The first such run on public roads with a Class 8 truck. That happened 5 years after the first ever autonomous load moved in Colorado, but there was a safety driver on board. And that was basically a load of Budweiser from the factory to the warehouse, from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs. In that case, it was a paid load.
That'd be pretty tricky terrain, I'm sure. Maybe.
Well, there was a safety driver on board. They got it onto the interstate, got it off the interstate. But for the most part, the Colorado State Police were involved to make sure everything was kosher. And I believe the company that did it made like $479 for the freight moves. It was actually paid as well. Not even roughly 5 years later, 80-mile freight move was made without a driver on board. 5 years. 5 years. What is the next 5 years going to bring? Because there is such a shortage of drivers right now, and they estimate that it'll be 160,000 by late in this decade, the trucking companies are compelled to do it. Now, at first, they don't anticipate that the move to autonomous trucking will displace any truck drivers. And what they're actually proposing is basically the worst part of trucking that nobody wants, which is the long haul point to point, or the middle part of the route. Or, the middle, not first mile, but what they're calling the middle mile, is the one that is ripe for all this autonomous activity. PACCAR, which is the brands of Peterbilt and Kenworth, have electric trucks in production now. They're working towards an autonomous truck. TuSimple is working with some truck makers. I believe another company, Aurora, is working with several, including Volvo, to develop and install what they call the Aurora Driver. What is happening with these companies that have developed the technology to superimpose or actually build into these Class 8 trucks, is what they're called, the heavy trucks, is that they're going to get paid some sort of subscription fee, maybe per mile, to actually operate the trucks. In other words, the trucking companies would own the trucks, but companies like TuSimple or Aurora would operate the trucks. And they would only operate the trucks within this middle mile framework. In the case of TuSimple, they've actually built freight lanes across the southern part of the United States, almost coast to coast, that would support this trucking activity now. And they anticipate, as this grows, that it will allow trucking companies to reimagine freight routes, how freight moves, how to do it in such a way that they can optimize both drivers and autonomy together in ways that make sense, which is basically first mile, last mile for the driver. But what the article didn't talk about, and it became evident to me, is as they move towards eliminating this long distance middle mile with an autonomous solution, also going to end up no longer being able to justify the kind of wages they're paying now.
That's what I was going to say. It was interesting you made the comment, it's not going to displace any workers right now. And that makes sense. It's kind of common sense because right now, and I think in a lot of industries where they fearmonger about robots taking the jobs, oftentimes they supplement and help where we need it. But I do think the reason we've gotten at least partially into the situation of having the shortage of truck drivers is treatment of workers.
Yes.
And so it's funny they kind of play on both sides, like this is going to help, and it is. But it's like they also don't like to probably admit that we got to this point because it's a crappy job, and well, they have looked for ways to pay better, like 3-day, 4-day work weeks, some better hours where they're at home. It's just by the time people do the training and actually get into the opportunity, has the quickest burnout rate of like any industry, and it's one of the most dangerous jobs.
Oh, it is dangerous
in the United States.
And they're going to eliminate the most dangerous part. However, in doing that, you can really justify paying $60,000 a year for somebody driving first mile, last mile, which is local basically, where you're home every night. That's the advantage. But like so many other industries where technology took away the most dangerous aspects of the job, it is also, I believe, in the long run, going to push down wages. Now, it's not going to happen in 5 years. It's not going to happen in 10. Because of the trucking shortage, this will take a bite out of mainly this trucking shortage. But on the long haul, maybe in 15 years, I would anticipate as that tide changes, as the balance changes, where you have more drivers retiring than coming into the field, that I think that as drivers transition to first mile, last mile, it becomes a lot less lucrative financially because it just doesn't make economic sense.
Yeah.
Not to mention that the autonomous technology is actually a lighter touch on the truck than a human driver, which means less wear and tear.
And you also wonder if it scares some people from getting their CDL in the first place. They're like, why would I waste this time to get a CDL if I don't know if a job's going to be there?
Well, like I said, this is not something that's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years.
And that brings our program to a close. Be sure to join us again next time right here. This has been Rogue with the Drive.